yourself at work is a good thing, largely. We'll explore that. If I can come to work and spend those hours being creative, constructive, productive, we all win. I'm happier, my business benefits, and society as a whole, I believe, benefits. But being authentic at work can take great courage, and it can also involve making ourselves vulnerable. I've had my own personal experience with that as a woman in the corporate world, and requires trust. And there are three key elements to this conversation today: organisational culture, leadership, and individuals. And there's a philosophical tension here between organisational culture, which is about externally imposed norms and behaviours, and individual authenticity, which is about me being true to myself and my own spirit, and essentially rejecting externally imposed norms. So that presents a challenge for those of us leading organisations, regardless of their size, whether you're in a large corporate or a small startup. So we intuitively know that being ourselves at work is largely a good thing, and I caveat that with whilst achieving the goals of any organisation and its governance, managing risk if we're in a PLC or working with venture capitalists. But what does the research tell us? Does it validate our instinct? Fantastic piece of research published in Harvard Business Review last year by Dr. Ann Wilson, exploring the implications of authenticity at work, and she confirms what our gut feeling tells us. When employees feel their authentic selves at work, they experience greater job satisfaction, lower levels of stress, higher levels of engagement, they feel more inspired, they feel a greater sense of community at work, and the vast majority of them tell us that it improves the workplace, which is fantastic. And anyone here involved in the space of hiring great people who are going to support the goals of your project or organisation and keeping them inspired and motivated will know that that is probably the greatest challenge you face every single day in an organisation. So this conversation really then starts with authentic leadership. And boy, do we expect a lot from leaders in organisations, no matter how large or small. We expect them to be really flexible, highly attuned, off the charts EQ and IQ, huge levels of empathy, but still prepared to take really, really tough decisions, to be innovative, but risk averse when it matters, to be charismatic, to be inspirational, the list goes on. And those of you starting on in your careers, it's quite a checklist, isn't it? But what that all boils down to is trust. And authenticity amongst leaders is more important than ever before. The rhetoric doesn't matter anymore. People are far more interested in a leader's walk than in their talk than in ever before. And leaders today are now operating in a very, very different and rapidly changing organisational context. In my lifetime, I have seen organisations change, becoming far more flat. Organisational hierarchy is less important than ever. As is age or experience is no longer a prerequisite for success. Organisations are becoming flatter, more community-based, more collaborative, more innovative, but you can start a great business in a basement, or should I call it a dream lab, with a great VC partner. You don't need to have 20 years experience on the board in order to do extremely well. So that's the leadership aspect of it. The workplace is transforming, we're asking more of leaders, and we are demanding transparency like never before. And Glassdoor is a great example of this. Employees rate their employer in real time, unmoderated, on a public site, unfiltered, and we're lucky enough to have been named as a top employer for the last 3 years on Glassdoor. And that's really encouraged us to embrace this transparency conversation. That congruence between what we say we stand for, our values and our culture, and how we behave has never been more important, because people will vote with their feet like never before. And this is backed up in our recent survey. We do a What Workers Want survey. We had 14,000 people complete this in the UK and Ireland very recently. 62% said, I would take a pay cut for the right cultural fit. Now, personally, I'm not surprised by that because I work in people and culture. What I was surprised at is the discrepancy between how we have that conversation. Most employers say, we discuss culture and values at the interview thoroughly. yet only 2/3 of people going through an interview process agreed with that. So let's talk about this conversation. If you are applying for a job or someone asks you, tell me about your culture, what you're really hearing is, can I fit in here? Can I be my authentic self here? Can I learn and grow and achieve my potential? Do I trust you? 2/3 of people are now asking for a diversity policy when they apply for a job and that organisation's position on that. It again speaks to this authenticity conversation. Can I see people who look like me? Will my position be valued? Are you mature enough to respect diverse opinion? And we've heard a lot over the last day and a bit already that creativity comes from diversity. We're going for the National Equality Standard, and that's a great benchmark to force us to have these conversations at Hayes about our diversity and inclusion position. So culture becomes increasingly important with every passing moment. And it's the conversation that's emotionally engaged about why I choose to work here, not the brand values from marketing, but the honest conversation when you're hiring people about what it's like to work in your organisation. So how are we navigating change? Well, first of all, the workplace is changing physically, as we know. Remote working, flex working, collaboration tools and communication technology means we get greater balance. That should be a good thing, right? If we can get balance in our private work life, we should be able to bring more of our authentic selves. But this presents real challenges to organisations. How do I drive a culture that is values-based and based on authenticity if I'm not in physical contact with people every day? How do I maintain those personal connections, and how do I make sure our employees are not feeling isolated from our culture? Another really interesting thing for authenticity for leaders is our digital footprint. You could have found out a bit about me if you wanted to before I turned up here. Now, if my LinkedIn photo is 10 years old and my bio is kind of heavily embellished, that might show up for you the minute that I started talking to you this morning and might disrupt how authentic you think I am and therefore your trust in me. And if we want people to make themselves vulnerable, we have to build trust. Likewise, this interesting instant intimacy we now have, or as some of us like to call it, oversharing information. And I work with young people in our organisation who are so keen to show all of themselves and their authentic selves that sometimes, they want to post a picture of themselves in a bikini in Ibiza as their LinkedIn profile shot, because that's me. Doesn't necessarily support their professional, authentic selves. So we have to do a little bit of work on that. So that brings me nicely to the conversation then about individual authenticity. And we talk about being ourselves and being true to ourselves at work. But the question really is, which self? We are multi-dimensional beings operating alongside other multi-dimensional beings in an organisational context where stuff has to get done. You might speak to your grandmother differently to how you converse with your friends. We do it in our private lives, we do it in our professional lives. I quite like wearing sweatpants. I feel quite authentic in them, I really do. But I can't wear them to work because of the context within which I work. I work 1 mile away from Silicon Roundabout in Old Street in London, but I work in the city. And those two ends of that mile represent vastly different organisational codes of behaviour, dress codes, hours, organisational hierarchy. One's not right or wrong, although you might argue differently, but each one has its own set of moderating behaviours. So the question might be, if I can be my professional self, perhaps my professional authentic self is the one that says, how can I most contribute to this goal while doing work that I'm passionate about and excited about and inspired about? So what advice would we give organisations? Well, firstly, if you're a leader in an organisation, I'm sure you've given this much thought, but think about how your people explain your culture when they are hiring, not the brand speak. The emotionally engaged, why do I work here and what does it mean to me speak. Involve your people in the highest purpose of your organisation. The greater alignment there is with purpose, the more people they feel that they can bring their natural selves. I certainly do to a job. Play to people's strengths. You know that marvelous time when you're in a state of flow and you're operating in your most natural state, how creative and productive you are. And it's no surprise that we love doing the work we're naturally good at. Wherever possible, build roles around individual strengths. Talk straight and provide your leaders with great training. They need support in this. And perhaps more importantly, for those of you starting out in your career, and I can speak specifically to young women, because I've had this challenge myself in a fairly male-dominated environment. Understand that we are learning and evolving and growing, and being your authentic self doesn't have to be a rigid, fixed point. I encourage introspection and self-awareness and knowing what you believe in. But David Bowie, the magnificent David Bowie, left us with a great thought, that aging is an extraordinary process where we become the person we should always have been. The minute that I kind of relaxed into the fact that I brought some unique strengths, I'm a bit different to most people I work with, a unique set of strengths and a unique perspective to a boardroom table that was mostly full of men, I started to have a lot more fun at work. I started to be a lot more creative, and I felt a lot more authentic. Thank you very much.